Welcome to Mrs. Nightmare. Thank you to M for my first subscriber-submitted horror story. This is We Created a Demon. Ghosts, demons, lost souls. Not much is known about these, and there's nothing definitive. They're nothing more than an unsolved mystery. A mystery many are desperate to solve. And while I don't have all the answers, I do have a theory. Demons can be created. Not summoned, created. To explain this, I need to go back to a little over a decade ago. I was 15 or 16 at the time. I had recently gotten into my first serious relationship. Things moved pretty quickly, and before you know it, we were living together at her parents' house. At first, everything seemed perfect. We'd spend hours just sitting around, listening to music, smoking weed, and talking about anything that popped into our minds. You know, basic young love shit. But after a while, something became apparent. This girl was trouble. She'd get angry when I tried to hang out with my friends, people I'd known for years, and people I saw as brothers. And being the naive, love-struck idiot I was at the time, I went along with it. I pretty much cut ties with the two best friends I had ever had. But she wasn't satisfied with that. Soon enough, she'd get angry and jealous when I tried to hang out with my own family. You're probably wondering what any of this has to do with anything, but trust me, I'm getting to that. What I'm trying to say is that what I thought was the best thing that had ever happened to me soon turned into an incredibly toxic relationship, and eventually, a nightmare. Skip forward a couple months. We'd pretty much spend our days arguing about the smallest things. We never got physical with each other, but I can't say there wasn't violence. We'd yell, throw things, threaten to leave each other, that sort of stuff. Like I said, toxic. Now, skip forward a couple more months. This is when things started to get weird. We lived on a dirt road, about 10 miles from the nearest city. Not many neighbors, and the ones that were around pretty much kept to themselves, so we were pretty isolated. We had one of those big shed-type things in the backyard, the ones they build with doors and windows to kind of have the appearance of a small house. Being the rebellious teenagers we were, that's where we'd spend most of our time, as far away from the adults as we could get. We absolutely loved it, until strange things began to happen. The night started off pretty normal. We ate dinner inside with the family, talked for a bit, then headed out to our paradise. When we opened the back door, we noticed the light in our shed was on. We were pretty sure we turned it off, but didn't worry too much about it, as we could both be pretty forgetful at times. So we entered and did as we always did, hung out for a few hours before bed. We eventually made our way back into the house, making sure we turned the light off on the way out. The following day, as we headed out, we noticed something off. Well, on actually, but I think you get what I mean. We had one of those electronic keyboards in the shed. One of those things you get as a gift, interest change, and you never touch it again. It had the preset tracks you could use to sort of play along. As we were walking through the backyard, we heard this strange sound. As we got closer to the shed, we realized that this is where the sound was coming from. It was the keyboard that hadn't been used in months. It was playing one of the beat tracks, but it wasn't the normal track you'd hear. Instead, some weird, distorted sound was coming from the speakers. A sound I can best describe as some alien creature being tortured. Not the best description, but if you'd heard the sound, you'd understand. Filled with hesitation, I entered the shed to investigate, to try and see what could be causing this. Upon entering, I immediately noticed that the keyboard wasn't plugged in. So I checked to see if there were batteries in it, but discovered the slot empty. Unable to figure out what was causing this, and with this bizarre, terrifyingly annoying sound blaring through my head, I picked the keyboard up from its stand and slammed it to the ground. This didn't appear to harm the keyboard itself, but the sound had finally stopped. Now able to hear my thoughts, I began to try to figure out what could have caused this. I don't know much about electronics, or the way they work at least, but the only conclusion I could come to was maybe a wiring problem had caused the keyboard to act in such a strange way. However, it hadn't been plugged in months. There couldn't possibly still be power running through its veins. So we debunked that and decided to just go back inside. That night, I lay awake in bed, trying to come to some logical conclusion. Something that would explain what had happened, but I couldn't. There wasn't a reason. There was no logical explanation. Still, my mind raced with every possibility. Eventually, I gave up, rolled over, and tried my best to forget about the strange occurrence. I finally got to sleep around 2 a.m., but that sleep was short-lived. I awoke around 3:30. I'm not exactly sure what woke me. but as I opened my eyes, everything felt strange. Not like a dream, but the room itself, the air, the atmosphere, it was all off. I can't explain the feeling, but it was incredibly unsettling and unlike anything I'd ever felt. Suddenly, as I'm lying there, I felt a slight pressure at the end of the bed, near my feet. I thought maybe it was my cat hopping up, but I looked down and saw nothing. Instantly, my mind went back to what had happened in the shed the night before. Terror filled me, coursing through my veins like a virus. I wish I could say it ended there, that I drifted off back to sleep, or that it was just a dream. Unfortunately, it was only the beginning. As I lay there, paralyzed by fear and worry, the pressure began to move up the bed, first to my knee and then further and further, until I felt it on both sides of my chest. My mind raced. What was happening? Was I imagining this? If I wasn't, what did this thing want? I closed my eyes tightly, somehow believing this would protect me from whatever it was that had crawled on top of me. At this point, I started to hear breathing, light, but I instantly knew what it was. It came closer and closer until I could feel breath on my lips, cold like ice, for what seemed like an eternity. Then it stopped for a second, only to start again. This time in my ear, it spoke, the words I'll never forget. "You did this, both of you, and now you get to pay the price." After that, I remembered nothing. I awoke the next morning. For a brief moment, it was like any other day. I thought of what I'd make for breakfast, taking my dog for a walk, conversing with my then-girlfriend's parents. Then I remembered the event that occurred in the shed, the invisible force that had terrified me to the point of paralysis. Although I knew what had happened, I had hoped it was all just some extremely vivid dream. But upon going into the bathroom to brush my teeth and looking in the mirror, something caught my eye. On my neck, a rash, red, reaching across my throat. Upon further inspection, though I realized it was no mere rash, this was a handprint on my neck. I didn't understand. I had been confronted by whatever this was last night, but I didn't remember it ever touching me. As I returned to my bedroom to tell my girlfriend what I had discovered, I heard talking coming from the room. When I opened the door, I found her standing beside the bed, mumbling something under her breath. Babe, are you okay?" I asked. I got no response from her, so I stepped closer to try and snap her out of whatever daze she was in. As I walked up to her, I now realized she was saying, "You did this," over and over again, blankly staring through me as though I wasn't even there. I grabbed her by the shoulders to try and shake her out of this, and it worked. Finally, she snapped out of it, her eyes meeting mine with deep confusion. "Hey babe," she says, "is everything okay?" I sat her down and explained to her what I had just seen, and asked her if she had remembered any of it. And why she had said those things, she remembered nothing. The next few days went on with nothing I consider strange happening. Definitely nothing compared to that night and morning. But that normality was short-lived. She began acting strangely. She had become incredibly depressed, something her and I were all too familiar with. But this was different. She'd stay in bed all day, she wouldn't eat, shower, she wouldn't leave the room, she would barely speak, and when she did, it was all mumbles. On her face, that blank stare I had seen when walking back in from the bathroom that morning. No matter what I did, she remained this empty shell. Overall, our relationship was shit. But still, I hated seeing her like this, and eventually I couldn't do it anymore. I began sleeping on the living room couch and spending most of my days outside, either sitting on the porch or walking. I check in from time to time to make sure she was okay, if that's what you want to call it. But day after day, it was the same. She'd eat a little every day, after her father threatened to send her to a mental institution. Just enough to keep her sustained, barely, but everything else stayed the same. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't watch TV or play video games like she'd normally do. She'd just sit there. One morning, after about 2 weeks of sleeping on the couch, I awoke to her standing over me. "Hey, can we talk?" I was startled, but this was the first time she had spoken to me in weeks, so I accepted. Yeah, sure," I said. "Mind if I come into the room?" I asked. She nodded, took me by the hand, and led me to our room. We talked for a while. She told me she had been in a dark place, but that she was okay now. She even apologized to me and begged me not to make her sleep alone. And I, being the empath that I am, succumbed. The rest of the day was great. I'd even say amazing. Probably the best day we had had in the 3 years we were together. We talked, we laughed. I felt like we were getting to know each other all over again. A new beginning, I thought. A chance to fix all that had gone wrong. That night, we sat with the family for dinner, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Everyone seemed overjoyed that she was finally herself again, and at this point, I'd completely forgotten about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. It felt perfect, like everything would be okay. After dinner, we headed to our room. We talked and cuddled for a while before finally drifting off to sleep. That night, again around 3:30 a.m., I awoke. Again, feeling this pressure on each side of my chest. Hesitantly, I opened my eyes. To my surprise, instead of seeing nothing like I had expected, I see her, my girlfriend, arms next to my chest, face only inches from mine. Before I could open my mouth to ask her what she was doing, she firmly placed her hand over it. She came in even closer, her eyes glowing a bright red. "You did this," she whispered, "and now you get to pay the price." Frozen, I saw her other hand lift from beside me. In it, a huge hunting knife we had bought at a flea market a few months back. My eyes widened. I tried to move, tried to speak, but nothing came out. She raised the knife to my throat and repeated the words, "You did this," before running the freshly sharpened knife across my throat. She never broke eye contact, never blinked, just stared into my eyes, watching with pleasure while the blood poured from my throat. I tried to scream, tried to call for help, but it was pointless. No one could hear me. I was dying, bleeding to death while the girl that once meant everything to me watched. A slight smile on her face. Finally, she stood and walked out of the room, leaving me to my fate. As I struggled to breathe, cold swept into my body like a winter chill. I managed to get to my feet, for a second at least. I fell to the ground, though, almost instantly. Unintentionally grabbing the lamp from my bedside table as I fell, I hit the floor, and so did the lamp, shattering into 100 pieces. I tried to get to my feet once again, holding my left hand to my throat, trying to preserve whatever blood still remained in my body. But it was no use. I fell again, and again, and again, until finally everything went black. The cold gone, my fear gone with it. This is the end, I think to myself, and that's the last thing I remember. I awoke the next day in a hospital. Beside me, my girlfriend's mother sat. "How are you feeling?" she asked me in a concerned tone. "Where am I?" I ask. "What happened? Where?" "You're in the hospital," she interrupts. "Sarah attacked you last night, but luckily we got you here when we did." Apparently, she had been awake at the time I was attacked and heard the thud of me falling and the shattering of the lamp. Upon walking out of her room, she discovered Sarah in the living room, covered in blood, writing something on the wall. They made eye contact for a brief moment before Sarah, or what was left of her, ran out of the front door. She then found me, bleeding out on the floor. If it weren't for the fact that she had medical training as a nurse, I wouldn't be here today. Sarah's parents had lived in that house for over 30 years and never had anything happen they would consider strange. All of the anger, hate, resentment, sadness we had toward each other, I believe, that somehow created a demon. Or some sort of angry spirit. I'm sure it sounds crazy, but all of that negative energy, constant, in one place, and those 3 words, "You did this." I can't say for sure, and I don't have any science to back up my theory, but I believe this is what happened. It's been over 10 years, and Sarah was never found. Although I live a good life now, happily married to an amazing woman, with 3 beautiful children, that night, those events, they still haunt me. Every night, in my dreams, I relive the nightmare that was once my life. Seeing her face over mine, feeling the blade running across my throat, blood gushing from my body. This is my curse. If you enjoyed this story and would like to support my channel, please subscribe. And if you have a story you'd like to share, send it to story@mrsnightmare.com. Thank you.